What's going on? Time for something a little different. So, I don't know how many of you guys are on Reddit, right? Reddit, Reddit, reddit.com. It's a website that's got the kind of tagline of front page of the internet. And basically, there are things called subreddits on there, which are, it's like a big forum, right? And the subreddits are kind of little sub-forums that you can join that are usually about a certain topic, right? So, you know, there might be a subreddit called Australia, Melbourne, Pokemon, guitars, whatever. You can make a subreddit yourself, you can be the moderator, and it can be about any topic you want. And then people can join that subreddit, share things, they can share photos, videos, articles, text, and they can comment on things. So, long story short, I spent a lot of time on Reddit. And there's one particular subreddit called r/AskAnAustralian, right? All of the subreddits, the URL starts with r/ and then the name of the subreddit. So this one is called Ask an Australian. And the topic that I'm reading about that has loads of comments that I saw come up, and it sort of prompted me to want to record this podcast episode, was someone had asked, Australian immigrants, what shocked you when you moved here? So it's obviously an Australian or someone living in Australia asking migrants who've moved to Australia, what was the sort of most surprising thing about when they got here? You know, what did they notice? And I was reading some of these and I thought, you know what, it'd be kind of cool to talk about these on the podcast and share them with you guys, because I love hearing about these things. I love chatting about these things, you know, cultural differences, culture shock. How does your country, your language, your culture, everything like that differ from mine over here in Australia? And I have these kinds of chats with my wife all the time. So anyway, let's go through, read some of these comments, and I'll give you my 2 cents on top of it. Okay, so this one comes from Lingonberry_born. I'm an Aussie, but after a few years living in Europe, visiting home and seeing a huge bird eating a snake, Aussie birds look prehistoric compared to the dainty little ones in Europe, and the noises they make are quite hilarious. So yeah, that's an interesting one to think about. It's kind of taken for granted here in Australia that we have loads of large predatory birds. You know, if I'm just driving along the freeway here, or the highway rather, there's farms all over the place, and so you see eagles, you'll see wedge-tailed eagles sometimes, but most often you'll see things like kites. They're a type of predatory bird. And they're just circling in the sky, hunting small rodents, other birds and lizards and everything like that are in the fields or on the side of the road. So yeah, there are loads of these sort of predatory birds flying around, hunting things. Kookaburras, you'll see them from time to time, and they're known for catching and eating lizards and snakes. So it is one of those things you kind of just take for granted here in Australia. All right, Reece Cheems from Sydney apparently says, shopping malls turning post-apocalyptic at 6 p.m. This is post-apocalyptic. So I guess his point here is like there's no one there. It's as if it's, you know, the apocalypse has taken place and everyone's gone, everyone's dead. And yeah, it is. This is one of those things that I've chatted to my wife about quite often. She's kind of shocked at how early shops close in Australia here. And I think I've heard this from loads of people, especially Europeans, so people from places like Spain and France and Italy, and then I think also South Americans, because I think the big cultural differences that I get from them is that they're a lot more active at night and they go out on the town, even on you know, weekdays and everything, and they'll have dinner at a later time. You know, here in Australia, it's pretty common to have dinner at about 5 p.m, 6 p.m, you know, sort of, it's funny, it's almost mid-afternoon, right? But early evening, and for us, it's the same thing. You know, I get the kids from daycare at about 4 o'clock, bring them home, and we usually start having dinner at around 4:30 or 5, just because, you know, they're in bed by about 7 or 8, so that's just the pattern we're in. But I think as a result of this kind of cultural thing here, like we get up, we have breakfast. You know, people will have breakfast from anywhere between 6 to 9 a.m. maybe. Lunch is around 12 o'clock on the dot, usually, you know, straight away at 12 o'clock. And then dinner, is usually 5 to 7 p.m. You know, again, That's what we would do. But from what I understand, a lot of other places are like, we don't even start dinner until, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. at night most nights. And I remember too when my wife was like wanting to go out on the town and, go clubbing or go out and party or whatever with mates. A lot of her Brazilian mates and her would like get ready, and they'd be getting ready until like midnight. And then only at midnight, they'd be like, all right, I guess it's time to go. And you'd just be like, as an Australian, I'd be like, it's time to go to bed. What are you talking about? Time to go out. You nut jobs. So yeah, that is a thing. And it was one thing that I noticed in Canberra in particular. Canberra was one of these places where it was kind of like this stereotype on steroids. It was like this taken even further, right? Where it was just dead quiet at night. And on weekends, the city was just like dead quiet, shut. Everyone had left. It was post-apocalyptic. So yeah, that is one of these things. I think I'll get that reverse culture shock if I go over to Brazil one day with my wife and we, stay there for a while. I think I'll probably be shocked at how late everyone will be wanting to have food. I'll be like, it's 5 o'clock, let's have dinner. And they'll be like, hold your horses, we've only just finished lunch. Okay, Martin 987 here says low quality internet and mobile networks. Yep, that's a thing. I think largely it's related to the size of the country, and over such large distances, the internet and these mobile networks have to be distributed, and our low population density by comparison, right? Like if you go somewhere like Great Britain, you've got 65, 70 million people within a country the size of effectively Victoria, in Australia here. So it's this tiny little area that has so many people. I think you probably can't go for more than a 10-minute drive in the UK without ending up in another town. Whereas in Australia, you can go for, depending on where you are, if you go driving out in the sticks in the bush, you could drive for days without seeing another soul. So yeah, that's a big part of it. But then there's also mismanagement by the government, right? When they rolled out the NBN, the National Broadband Network, they just did such a shit job of it that by the time it was completed, the infrastructure was already out of date, right? So it was just stupid. But yes, our internet sucks and it's overpriced. Our mobile networks largely suck as well, especially if you don't go with the large ones, like the ones that actually own the mobile towers and everything. I'm with Telstra, and that's probably the best company to go with in terms of coverage or networks because they own the infrastructure. So pretty much everywhere you get really good reception. If there's going to be a reception, you're going to get it with Telstra. That was the rule. If there's no reception, your best chance is to have Telstra, and if you're with anyone else, you got no hope. So yes, that's definitely a thing. This one comes from JawK297, who said here, speaking from what I've heard from my wife, moved here from the UK, the humidity. That's an interesting one. So I've always heard that the UK is really humid. So I don't know if when they say the humidity, if they mean that it's not humid, it's dry, or if it's very humid. And obviously this is going to depend where you are in Australia. If you're in the tropics, like if I go to Cairns, bloody hell, or Darwin. I haven't been to Darwin, but I've got friends who live there, and I've heard that that's just off the charts humid. But down here in the south, and probably once you get to about Brisbane and further south, it is pretty dry. So you're not going to have the same kind of humidity that I think you'd get in the UK. And that's the stereotype I always hear, that the UK, the Pommies will have a whinge about it being 30 degrees. Oh my God, it's 30 degrees Celsius. And we'll be like, what are you talking about? That's like the average day in summer. But then you'll hear, no, but it's like 100% humidity. And you're like, okay, all right. Yeah, that's pretty brutal then. All right, next comment from this person is like, people having their feet out. So thongs and bare feet, etc. outside. Yes, this is a thing. I don't know. I think it's not everyone. I think you'd have to be pretty lazy to kind of just go to the shops in bare feet. Not that I've never done it, but like my parents would never do that. My grandparents, hell no, they would never do that. It's because it's kind of seen as a bit of a bogan thing, right? It's kind of like a lower class thing. It's like swearing in public too, right? My grandparents aren't going to just be walking around the supermarket swearing their heads off, dropping F-bombs. Whereas there are definitely certain people in society who do that. But yes, it's kind of socially acceptable to walk into Coles in bare feet. It's going to be, you're still going to see these people and be like, gross, but you kind of just accept it. I think it happens often enough that it's kind of accepted. A lot of restaurants and retailers have a more customer is always right philosophy. That's interesting. I feel like we probably are somewhat people pleasers. I've heard that about people saying that about Australians, where we're really eager to just be everyone's friend, be in everyone's good books, not be hated by anyone. So I guess I can see that. Like, we're not a very disagreeable bunch. Maybe we need to work on that. People being a bit more self-oriented, not as much care about community. That's an interesting one. I feel like it probably used to be more a community sort of care focused kind of thing. Like, I don't know if that's always just the way that people think about the past. The way that people always cared more about community in the past, but yeah, I can kind of see that to some degree. I don't know if that's a population size thing though. Like, once you get to a certain level in terms of the population of a place, it's kind of hard to have the same type of emphasis on community. Maybe it's not hard. Maybe it's just what we're like here. The amount of trees, spiders, and bugs. Again, that's going to depend where you live. But yes, I think if you compare it to places like the UK and Europe, yeah, you're going to have a lot more of that stuff around, just based on the environment. Anyway, we'll get to the next one. They've got a few on that list, but yeah. All right. Education Today Oz has said, I remember finding the Greek Australian accent completely incomprehensible. And someone's left them a comment. What have they said? I grew up in Oakley and 80% of my mates were Greek. I thought that was a Greek accent. Then I'd meet their relatives from Greece and was like, what the fuck? They sound nothing like you. So I think what this person's talking about is the quote unquote WOG accent. If you watch a movie like Wog Boy, that's probably a good Australian movie to check out to get an idea of this accent. But it's this kind of, I don't even know how to sort of describe it. It's like an ethnic accent that's come from the second and third and fourth generation of migrants who've come from places like Greece, Lebanon, and Italy. So this was sort of the migration to Australia, the mass migration to Australia that happened after the Second World War. There were loads of people from Greece, Lebanon, Italy, and they ended up moving to more affordable areas around large cities like Sydney and Melbourne. And as a result, the kids grew up together from these families, and they were kind of all, I imagine, they were kind of all treated as like, the migrant kids, So they got thrown into the same basket, and then they developed their own identity as being Australian, but being the children of migrants. And they have this very distinct accent, or not all of them, but some of them definitely have that quote-unquote WOG accent. And I feel uncomfortable saying WOG, but it's one of these terms that was racial in the past, but then kind of got owned by people who consider themselves, or were considered to be WOGs. And now it's kind of used all the time without the same offensive strength to it, but hence movies called things like Wog Boy. Fat Pizza, that would be a TV show to check out as well, that has a lot of that culture in it. I think you'll have the Greeks, the Italians, the Lebanese, and that Bogan culture, everything like that, and those accents, and I can't even do it. It's that sort of like, fully six subwoofer. That's the stereotypical line that I think anyone who says, what's the accent like, will throw out. But yeah, it is interesting that I had friends like that at uni who had that accent, and you would meet their parents who would be from, they've moved over from somewhere like Greece or whatever, and they would not have that accent at all. It was funny. It was obviously something that developed through peer connections, people being friends with other kids at high school and all wanting to sound the same, So yeah, it is a really cool, kind of interesting aspect to Aussie culture. All right. Mini GM Goet. I have no idea how to say this person's name. How big this sky was. I can't explain how or why, but the sky was and is fucking massive here. Go forward a few years when I drove up the guts, so that's up the middle, for the first time, and we camped out and I saw the Milky Way properly. for the first time ever without any light pollution, and it moved me to tears. I'll never forget that moment. Yeah, I'm still waiting to sort of have that moment. I really have to go to somewhere like Uluru or Central Australia and be able to see the night sky when there's no full moon and when there's no light pollution from cities nearby, because yeah, I've heard that it's absolutely ridiculous, right? And I think Australia's probably unique in that we're an incredibly flat country, so that's probably why a lot of the time the sky seems so big, because you're not really very often, you're not surrounded by mountains. It tends to be wide open spaces. And yeah, because of the size of the continent and the fact that the population is distributed pretty much around the south and east coasts, if you go into the interior of the country, you can be hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers away from large cities, and you won't have anywhere near the same amount of light pollution. So yeah, like I imagine if you're in Great Britain, in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, you're always going to be pretty close to other cities to some degree. I mean, there's probably areas where it's, like the Amazon rainforest. You're in the middle of the Amazon, you're probably sweet. But yeah, that is something that I've heard a lot of people talk about. This one comes from AR987. How relaxed everyone is and how they're always making jokes and etc., especially in environments that would traditionally be serious. Things like banks, real estate agents, hotels, restaurants, and so on. It's true. It's true. My wife is always like that. Whenever we have I don't know, issues or something we're worried about, or, we're in a serious situation, I make jokes, to sort of try and lighten the mood. And she's always just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? So yeah, it's true. It's true. Joe Schmo. Migrated here from the US, but also lived in South America, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Probably the most immediately different thing was the business hours. Okay. I'm not a shopper, but it was strange to see cafes closing at 3 p.m, bars closing at midnight, etc., and that there's a special late night shopping hours on Thursdays, which just means shops stay open till what other countries would consider normal hours. Mind you, I'm fine with this, except the cafe hours. They close when you need a coffee the most, but it's the difference that jumped out the most when I got here. Yeah, I think we've sort of talked about this, right? I think, these shops have probably just followed the hours that they're busiest, and if patronage dries up at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think they're just like, all right, well, what's the point? If we make all of our money in the early part of the day and then pretty much nothing in the afternoon, we're losing money if we're having to hire people to work in the restaurant, in the cafe, in the business, whatever it is, and no one's coming in, right? We don't have any clients or anything. So yeah, it is interesting. I wonder how much it's cultural versus population density, right? But yeah, it is one of those things. I always forget this. So and it's not like a law or something, it's not that they have to close at 3 o'clock. I think loads will stay open until 5, but quite often places will just choose to close at earlier times. And there's a town nearby called Point Lonsdale, near the opening. It's on the left-hand side of the opening of Port Phillip Bay, if you're in Victoria here, right? So it's near the mouth of the bay. And it's only got a population of a few thousand, if that, and a lot of it's holiday homes, so it's incredibly quiet down there. But anytime I drive down there, it's probably 25 minutes away. If I go down at like 3 o'clock, my favourite cafe down there is closed, and I always forget. I go down there, I'm driving around because I'm like, yeah, it's still daytime, it's fine. And I'll go to get a coffee and be like, oh, fuck, it's closed, they've closed. Let's keep going. Okay, rent prices. May as well go back home. Sleeping in the car sucks. This one comes from Sniper Wolf 232323. Yes, rent has gone through the roof. As you guys are probably aware, at least the ones living in Australia, we've had huge amounts of migration over the last year and a half. I think we've had 500,000 people come in to the country. And the housing market just sucks. We haven't had enough houses. We haven't had enough houses that are rentable. And so, it's a supply-demand thing where there's more demand than supply at the moment. And so apparently it's something like less than 1% of Australia's rental homes are available for rent at the moment, which is the lowest it's been in a very long time. So, yeah, I'm definitely not envious of anyone trying to get into the rental market at the moment. It's just an absolute nightmare. The blue-assed fly. The difference between the people of Australia, awesome for the most part, and the people of Australian subreddit, bitter and hateful for the most part. It's kind of funny. Reddit can be a bit of a cesspool at times. It is. It's funny how the different subreddits, if you guys use Reddit, you will probably know they'll have different sort of cultures. There'll be certain subreddits where there's just a lot of hate and rudeness and nastiness, and then other ones that are way more positive. But yes, okay. So this one comes from Hausen Written Daz. Safety manager wearing shorts. Anyone in a work environment wearing shorts. That shit is crazy. I'm currently working on bulking my chicken legs so that I can wear one soon enough. So effectively he's saying that loads of professionals here, probably those working outdoors, are wearing shorts, including managers, and it just being a weird thing. And him saying he wants to bulk up his chicken legs. So chicken legs would be like someone with very skinny legs, and to bulk them up is to get them bigger. So he's obviously saying he's a bit, embarrassed to have shorts on because he's got very skinny legs. This is a thing. This is something my wife finds really humorous. She sees tradies and she'll be like, they have these little shorty shorts. What's with the shorty shorts? These shorts that are like not even halfway down their thigh, right? Like their femur. They're not even halfway down to their knee, these little shorty shorts. She's like, these are the weirdest camp, pieces of clothing that would just never be worn in Brazil. And I'm always like, it's just a cultural thing. It's hot here. Obviously enough people do it where you don't get teased about it. The same thing with like hairstyles like mullets, just enough people have them when no one cares. It's just it's just the cultural thing. All right. Here we go. Julian Keynes says people in their 30s living with their parents. This again comes back to the housing affordability thing and the availability of housing. So I think it's just pushing that age back when people are buying houses, when people are moving out from home. I remember watching Everyone Loves Raymond when I was a kid, and there used to be this stereotype that, I don't know if it was American, if it's Australian, if it's a Western world thing, but it would always be that like people from places like Italy or Greece, Lebanon, those sorts of areas, they were always seen as more family-oriented groups. And so it was a lot more important to show respect to your parents, to always do what they say, they'd have big family parties all the time. There was a huge emphasis on that. And that, again, I'm not saying that as a negative, but there would be this attitude also, I remember, of like, the sons in particular don't move out for a very long time. They live at home with their parents. I don't know if that was because the parents would be like overbearing and like very controlling of the kids, or the kids would be sort of like more introverted and not want to, go out from under the wing of their parents. But that was definitely something I was aware of. And I remember that being a running joke on the TV show Everyone Loves Raymond, where Raymond's brother, Robert, still lived across the road at his elderly parents' house. And I think he would have been like, isn't he like nearly 40 or something? Or he has his 40th birthday in that series. So he's like 40 years old, still living with his parents. And they're Italian, by the way, in that TV show, if you haven't seen it. Everyone Loves Raymond. It's really funny. But yes, it's definitely becoming a more common thing. And I think, it's related to housing prices. It's just too expensive. And you have to... There was a thing I was watching on the news probably a few years ago when I was trying to find a house. There were people in Sydney trying to buy a house. And the average price of a house now in Sydney is $1.6 million. Jesus. And anyway, these two people had gotten married. They were in their 20s and they'd lived with their parents, or one set of parents, for, I think, a number of years, just in order to try and save as much money as possible to put a deposit on a house to be able to buy a house. So yeah, that's definitely a huge thing. And it's probably going to just get worse and worse and worse in Australia. All right, let's do a few more and then we can finish up. This one comes from Good Blacksmith 2989. Moved from New Zealand, and honestly the heat I expected to kill me, but a 35-degree day here is so much more tolerable than even 24 back home. Again, I wonder how much this is related to like dry heat versus humidity, because I hear this about, as I said, Great Britain and London being just, when it gets into the 30s, it's just unbearable because of the humidity. So yeah, I don't know. I guess it would be like 35 degrees in Melbourne versus 35 degrees in somewhere like Cairns, which is pretty much every day in summer in Cairns, and it's pretty brutal there. When I've been there, it's just been like, oh my God, it's crazy. I remember I did a lot of research work and volunteer work up in Bundaberg and further north when I was a undergraduate student and master's student. I was studying turtles up there, sea turtles. And so I spent a lot of time up there in sort of far north Queensland. And I remember leaving Melbourne, and it'd be like in the tens of degrees, like 10 to 20 degrees. And you'd have pants on, you'd have a hoodie on, and you'd get on the plane. And then when you got off in Brisbane, you'd be like, oh, it's pretty hot. And then you get to Bundaberg or somewhere like Cairns, and you'd be like, oh my God, I'm never going to wear pants or a jumper ever again. I can't, I think I've got friends living in Cairns recently, and I said, do you guys have hoodies? Do you wear jumpers? And they were like, nope. All right, we'll do the last one. This one is Darrenus. The fact that I can drink water straight from the tap. This is another thing, like, I guess we just take for granted here in Australia. But again, a lot of the rest of the world, you can't do that, as you guys are probably aware. I remember going to Indonesia and my supervisor being like, don't drink the tap water. Whatever you do, do not drink the tap water. You'll get sick. The locals don't. They've got they've built up an immunity, but if you do it, you'll get sick. And sure enough, on the trip, not me, but other people we were with ended up with gastro a few times, where they were just, having a bad time, vomiting and on the toilet all night. So we were constantly drinking bottled water. And I just remember thinking, like, how hard is it to just, put fluoride and chlorine in your water? But obviously there's, huge differences. And I think the same for Brazil. There's a thing in Brazil, from what my wife tells me, where Brazilians in the kitchen will have this filter system that you pour water into, and it cleans the water, and you drink the water once it's gone through that. And I remember she's like, every kitchen will have one of these on the bench. And I'm just like, that's just not a thing, That's, I remember too, another cultural difference that always blew my mind was that my wife just gets tea towels, right? The cloths that we use in the kitchen for drying things, cleaning things, whatever, drying your hands. She just lets them fall on the floor and then uses her foot to clean the tiles if there's any spillage from the sink or whatever of water, whatever it is. She'll just leave that towel on the floor, and it's a floor towel. And I didn't realize, I always was just like, why are you so lazy? Just pick it up and put it in the wash. You don't have to just leave it on the ground. And she's like, I think it was probably 1 or 2 years into a marriage where I finally sort of had a go at her and said, why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep leaving bloody tea towels on the floor? Because every day I have to pick them up and put them in the wash. And she's like, I have to do it because she was getting irritated at me, because she's like, every day I come and someone's picked up the towel off the floor that I used to clean the floor. And that was when we, had a chat and a laugh and realized that it's a cultural thing, at least for her, where she's like, it's a floor towel, do a search. There are actual things called effectively floor towels in Brazil that you buy, and you just use them to leave on the floor and use it to wipe up any spillage or whatever. And so that was a cultural shock thing for me, where I was like, okay, but it's, makes sense, and it's really convenient. And so we just always have a tea towel on the floor in the kitchen. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode, guys. You'll have to let me know what you think, because this subreddit Ask an Australian is really interesting. So obviously go check it out. But also, if you like this episode and you want me to do more of these, let me know, because there's always really interesting topics that are coming up, and I think it'd just be really fun to kind of talk about on the podcast. It's another reason to have an episode on here. So definitely give me some feedback. If you've enjoyed this episode, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know too. That's just as important. Besides that, I'm Pete. This is Aussie English. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.